This is JILLIANA Ranicar-Breese, and I'm still with Stephen Durnford, and this is part 4 of our conversation. Now tell me, Stephen, you're quite an authority on the Lycians. Tell me about them.
They were a people who lived in the province of Lycia, as it was known to the Romans, which is the bit that hangs south like a bulge above Cyprus when you're looking at modern Turkey. They spoke their own languages until Roman times, and their language is descended from what was spoken on a wider area in the Bronze Age, and they had an alphabet that they adapted for themselves from the other alphabets around. And although it was discovered in 1840, it was not until the end of the beginning of the 20th century that it was actually understood to be related ultimately to English and the other members of that family.
How do you mean English?
Well, they're all members of the Indo-European family of languages, which includes Greek, Latin, Russian, and various others that were discovered during the 20th century, like Tocharian in Chinese Turkestan, the Germanic languages, the Celtic languages, and several others. And when you put the known written forms together, you can deduce earlier ancestral forms. And this has allowed a certain amount of decipherment to take place, but scholars are still arguing wildly over the interpretation of some of the Lycian texts. But some of them, fortunately, were written during the time of Greek occupation, before or after Alexander, and under the Persian Empire.
What date would that be? Well,
these are from, let's say, 5th or 4th century until the year AD 0, if you like, which doesn't actually exist.
And where would the scrolls be?
All of them are inscribed by chiseling in stone.
Stone. Not on paper.
There are no paper ones. One presumes that they would have been literate in that respect, but this sort of thing wouldn't survive. Possibly also on wood. But in fact, there are 2 languages in Lycia, which are clearly relatives but have different sound systems, both written in the same alphabet. And there was some kind of political overlap between the speakers of the one and the speakers of the other.
And what were they called?
Well, there have been various names given to them. I use terminology Lycian A and Lycian B because we don't really know which geographical areas they were attached to, although there's evidence that what I call Lycian B was spoken further to the east, and some scholars have called it Milian from the Miluas, which is that region.
Are you talking Anatolia here?
Yes, this is within Lycia in Anatolia, yes. Mm-hmm. They contain some very interesting references to known historical people, particularly among the Persians. You find the name Darius and satrap and other Persian Empire terms transcribed in Lycian script and spelt their own way, which gives a little insight into how they pronounce them.
Right.
And there's still a lot of research going on.
But what about in Persia itself or Iran? Are the scholars doing research there?
There are various scholars all over, and the Persian Empire tended to import people into its centre in Persepolis, and there are references to these people, but no actual textual remains of theirs there. They are really just referred to by name as one of the peoples in the empire, along with others like Lydians further north and Ionians, the Greeks on the coast, and more or less every other country in the area that was a member of their empire, including over the other side into India.
So is this linked with what I've heard of called the Lycian Way?
The Lycian Way is a road or path that runs, I believe, round the coastal region and is a sort of favourite of modern explorers to walk.
I think it's from Cide to Fethiye or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, the Sea Day is interesting because it is another one with a different script and a different language, and almost not understood at all. The whole area seemed to be filled with places. Pamphylia is the Greek name for that region, where several towns had quite independent alphabets and languages, and I have the feeling that they deliberately edited these into existence in order to maintain their autonomy of identity, one from another, and in common against Greek culture that was beginning to swamp everything after the conquest by Alexander the Great. And of course his name is another one that appears in the texts. It's very difficult to be definitive, except to say that there are published books which list all the known inscriptions and dictionaries of what the words mean and so on, and part of my own activity is trying to improve on bits of these.
And you've written texts yourself?
Yes, they feature in some of my articles, partly to do with their relationship to their Bronze Age ancestral languages, and partly to do with analysis of the languages as found and attempting to spot grammatical changes that were going on before they died out altogether. It's all entirely academic in both senses because there's no descendant from these languages, and the only value apart from the fun of puzzle solving is that we have history wrapped up in these that corresponds to and sometimes expands upon what is known from ancient Greek chroniclers from the last 500 years BC.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen.